Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, this is the era of hard times and the hard rock. For both, progress has been slow, including increases in COVID cases. A child as a shooting victim and a hotel demolition at the delicate stage. We'll be looking at these stories as well as law enforcement versus consent decrees, uncertainty over carnival, the cost of living locally, K-Paul's closing, and rare good news about upcoming infrastructure improvements in the city of New Orleans. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Jessica Williams, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Ch 4, and Dave Cohen, news director, WWL Radio. And we stay with Dave, and we are looking to you to give us the latest COVID stats, which still aren't really where we would like to see them.
No, the bad news is that the last 4 days we've had at least 2,000 new cases every day in Louisiana. And on Monday, we had close to 2,000 new cases. That's nowhere near where we want to be. The city of New Orleans and Jefferson Parish are seeing far more cases than they want. New Orleans was hoping to only see about 50 cases a day. It's been over 100 a day every day this week. That's the bad news. Hospitalizations continue to creep up as well. 12 more hospitalizations reported today alone. That's also the bad news. The good news is that there are about 1,000 hospital beds available for coronavirus patients in greater New Orleans right now. So we're not pushing the hospital capacity to where it can't handle the load right now, at least in this region. Lake Charles, Alexandria, Acadiana, not so much. They're about to run out of hospital space. But here in New Orleans, it's good. Plus, if they have to, they still have a portion of those beds set up inside the convention center. They can reactivate that if they need it. The good news also, deaths are not rising nearly as quickly as the number of cases, nor the number of hospitalizations, because the vast majority of the new cases we've been seeing this week are people between the ages of 18 and 29. They do not have the comorbidities nearly as much as older people, the diseases that make them more vulnerable to death from coronavirus. And obviously they're younger, and we're seeing the vast majority of deaths in older people. So while there are a lot of people testing positive, a lot of people in hospitals, very few are dying compared to what we saw when we peaked in this pandemic in April here in Louisiana.
Now, we are in the metro area seeing new cases, but not as much. It's not as going up as much as it is in other parts of the state. In Lake Charles, is Lake Charles still really the worst spot?
It's really Lake Charles, Acadiana, and Alexandria. They're all fighting for that title, I guess you could say. And those are areas where they really are pushing to the limits now their availability to hospitalize patients who are sick with COVID-19. And so that's where the biggest concern is. But even in New Orleans, like I said, they only wanted to see 50 cases a day. Now we're seeing more than 100 a day in Orleans Parish. And again, it tends to be younger people who don't get as sick and are not as likely to die. But the other thing we still don't know is the long-term impacts of this. Even people who are younger who get it, there's some evidence now from other parts of the world that months, or we don't even know yet, years later, could still have impacts. While they don't die and they don't get very sick, it could compromise their lungs for a long time or perhaps forever. So we don't know, and that's why I think the government from the top on down is so concerned with this rising number of cases. In fact, the White House Coronavirus Task Force has sent Louisiana and 18 other states some more recommendations to close more establishments now to try and control the spread. They want to see the number of people allowed in restaurants reduced. They want to go down back to 25% in restaurants, according to the White House Task Force. They want gyms closed completely. They want more activities that are currently allowed inside moved outside, but not such an option here when the heat index is 110 to 123. You're not going to be eating outside. So the governor is currently considering if he wants to follow, and the mayor is as well, follow these new additional restrictions that the White House Coronavirus Task Force is proposing.
Well, the governor did tighten some of the restrictions. He did that for starting last weekend, right?
Correct. He did say that bars that do not serve food cannot be open inside the bar rooms anymore. People can only get curbside service and drinks to go. And restaurants that have bars cannot allow anyone at the bar. Anyone has to be seated to consume alcohol now in Louisiana, and they have to also order food. So you can't just go in, sit at a table and drink. You have to order food as well. The governor also capped the number of people allowed in any one place at any one time at 50. The White House Coronavirus Task Force wants that sent back down to 10. So essentially, the White House Task Force is saying, let's go back to phase one. Right now, we're in a modified phase 2, but we keep kind of tightening it to a point where we might get back to phase 1 sooner than later. And there's no indication that the governor and the mayor won't do that right now unless people start wearing their masks more and controlling the spread more, which so far this week we haven't seen any evidence of.
Hey, Dave, there seems to be so much dissension at the federal level now, just among the administration, between the president and Dr. Fauci, and people warring back and forth. If I was a state decision maker, I wouldn't know who to listen to or if I should listen. Do you hear anything from local officials about their feeling about Washington?
They have made it clear that they're charting their course as they see best fit for their constituency. And I think while the governor has not said a foul word about the president at all, even though they are in opposing parties, it is clear that he's taking his direction from the CDC and from the White House Coronavirus Task Force, not from the President of the United States. That said, the Vice President was here, and the governor was very cordial during his visit this week. And the Vice President thanked the governor for everything he did and said that the White House supports everything Louisiana is doing. He also, though, all but demanded that schools open in the fall with children in classrooms. And it's becoming increasingly less likely that's going to happen in Louisiana, in New Orleans, or in any parishes locally, because it's just not making sense right now. Teachers are fighting against it. Parents, in many cases, are fighting against it. And there's just no evidence other than the president and the vice president and some members who are very supportive of the administration and Congress saying, let's open all schools, let's have kids back in classrooms. There's just no evidence that that's going to happen. In fact, the CDC was supposed to give us guidelines this week. They haven't done that because they want to see where it's going. And now they say it won't be till the end of this month, probably, till we get those new guidelines. Well, schools open in parishes across Louisiana the first week of August is the schedule. Some have moved it back. So that CDC advice probably won't be there. The vice president, though, said when he was in Baton Rouge, let's not let CDC guidelines get in the way of opening schools. But I think schools are going to want those CDC guidelines nonetheless.
Yeah, we still have some time yet to see what's really going to happen in our schools opening. Just real quick, Dave, can you tell me how is testing right now? Is that easing up a little bit, or are we still seeing a shortage of supplies, making it hard to get tested? Real quick.
Some test sites are seeing a breakdown in the supply chain, but by and large, it's going very well. Louisiana reported its 1 millionth test this week. Jefferson Parish reported its 100,000th test this week. Okay. So there have been some temporary disruptions, and some labs are taking too long to process test results. But by and large, officials think we're headed in the right direction there.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dave. I'm going to head over to Mike right now. Tragic shooting resulting in the death of a 9-year-old child.
Right, and just to put this in context, this comes amid a spike in all shootings across the city. This one obviously got a lot of people's attention with a 9-year-old boy shot in the head, didn't even make it to the hospital, and a 15-year-old girl as well as a 15-year-old boy also shot in broad daylight, Villeray and Pogger. And this comes amid, like I said, it's one of the tragic New Orleans during the hot summer months, we do see an uptick in shootings and killings. This comes as we had obviously a lull and a 40-year low in homicides last year. Now we're up, 30% over last year's numbers, and getting worse seemingly by the day. Now on the 9-year-old. Devontae Bryant, the police have some leads. They were able to recover what they believe to be the getaway car, which was caught on a video. They recovered that outside of an apartment complex in Algiers. Also, we have two surviving victims to possibly provide some description, identification, but it does look like this was very intentional, and we were able to report earlier that it appears that the 15-year-old boy who was shot in the leg is going to recover was the intended target. So obviously everyone is dismayed and shocked over a 9-year-old boy shot and killed, but we're talking about a 15-year-old who's somehow was the target of a hit, a brazen, broad daylight hit with a bunch of bystanders, and obviously some of that was tragic collateral damage.
Initially, that 15-year-old was reported to be a 13-year-old. Is that correct?
Yeah, they didn't have the ages pinned down with the initial reports, but we are now hearing that boy is 15, and he could be the linchpin, solving the case. Now, usually, if there's not a instant arrest, let's say within the first 48 hours, there is often not a need to rush into making an arrest. The detectives have the information that they've developed and can kind of wait on that, maybe wait for some witnesses to come forward. There's often, as we all know, a lot of fear when someone is willing to pull a hit on a crowded street in broad daylight on just a Monday afternoon. That puts a lot of fear in folks who may have seen something, and so detectives are very careful to maybe let the case come to them a little bit as the word starts to circulate. We do know that, interestingly enough, and it's sort of a modern wrinkle to solving homicides, there were some posts on Instagram. So those social media posts are actual leads that detectives are tracing to talk to people. But once again, it's not detectives banging on a door canvassing a neighborhood. That is a surefire way to get people to clam up. They want to quietly get people meeting with them privately to give what information they know to help solve this case.
All righty, Mike. Thanks a lot. Errol, we're going to jump over to you right now, and some things that are just really a big part of our culture are also really being impacted by this pandemic.
Yeah, there's actually several stories where our culture is being affected by the bigger news story. We saw this week the announcement that K-Paul's was closing. K-Paul's a long time, very important story. If there was like a national hall of fame for restaurants, K-Paul's would be in there. They'd have some sort of a monument to it because of what Paul Prudhomme did. That Paul Prudhomme really created what I call nouveau Cajun food. When he was done, Cajun food, people thought of it differently than the Cajuns ever thought of it. He made Cajun cooking really spicy. Of course, the classic was the black and red fish. And once that became so popular, chefs were blackening just about anything they could around the country. It was so popular that the dish depleted the Gulf of Mexico of redfish for a while. And so that's achieving a measure of success. The one little thing in the long run, when people look back at it, is that the restaurant was so popular that there were long lines to get in. That may have turned off locals a little bit, especially with the practice of once you got in there was group seating. So if you were there with a date and you put it at a table and then there's some other couple that's there, locals especially didn't want that. Tourists who had no other choice because they were there for a limited amount of time did it. And so K-Paul's had a big following among tourists, but it was just a very popular restaurant. Paul Prudhomme died in 2015. It was taken over by his former chef and part of Prudhomme's family. They tried. We don't know. The restaurant certainly had reputation, but sometimes people have a business, they just want to move on, and maybe with time for that also. So it's a big loss. The other thing is in Carnival, there was an announcement this week that some former lieutenants of the crew of Nix, of course, Nix was involved in the whole controversy with the Black Lives Matter issue versus All Lives Matter, and a lot of people dropped out of the crew of Nix. 10 of them created a new organization called the Mystic Order of Phoenix. And they're going to just be a crew. They're going to do some good works around town. But they're going to also parade with the crew of Sparta, which parades on that first Friday night. And so you're seeing this all-women's group organizing and being part of the men's group of Sparta. But all that's just part of the, I guess, the turmoil and the change that's going on. But at the discussion, or at the press conference, a good bit of the discussion was, what do you all think about Mardi Gras? Will we be having a Mardi Gras? And, we have Mardi Gras the day, but will we have the celebration? And, nobody's saying no yet. There's still hope out there. I think a lot of the captains are being very cautious. I think they know they're not going to get as many riders as they've had in the past, maybe not as many floats. But no one is saying we want to pull out yet, and that we don't want it to happen. Right. And so we just have to see. Right. There may be a carnival celebration, may be modified. There may be different rules on crowd control, but for right now, the spirit is let's try, even though we may have some refigured carnival organizations.
Right. All right, Abe, thanks a lot. Over to Jessica right now. And New Orleans is up for some infrastructure improvements.
We are. The mayor's administration announced this week that she is planning to move by December to begin spending some of the $500 million that she told voters that she would borrow. Last November, voters approved that plan because in large part it would mean that they would pay no new taxes. And she decided to go ahead and begin to come up with a list of infrastructure projects to make that a reality. And it looks like the city council has to approve the specific list that she's come up with, which includes things like repairing streets, repairing bridges, spending a chunk of about $200 million in the first phase of this on libraries and museums, another chunk on equipment for the police and the fire departments. And at least one council member, it looks like the council is still trying to wrap its head around it. At least one council member has said that he needs more information, particularly about which specific streets, which specific bridges the city is looking to repair. And he really wants to make sure that we don't see this piecemeal sort of situation where you've got one block of one street repaired and another block of another street left out and neighbors feeling as though they are being left out. And so that's a couple of the projects that the administration is looking at by December to begin spending the money on to put online.
By December, this is when they'd start with this, is the start of the timeline.
That's when they'd start. So they would essentially what they have to do is issue the bonds and sell them and then start getting the proceeds back, of course, and then begin spending the money that they get back by December.
Right.
And that would take, over the course of a period of years before all of these projects are actually in the ground.
And within that plan, too, or at least ultimately within that bond issue money, is affordable housing. And while, affordable housing is something that is a big concern, the study was done recently about just wages here really don't help to pay the rent for affordable housing.
Exactly. I mean, if anyone who has been paying attention about the cost of living in New Orleans knows it is not what it used to be in terms of how high and how expensive it is now to rent in the city. Every year for a while now, a national coalition has taken a look at just how much you need to earn in order to be able to live comfortably in an apartment in New Orleans. And every year we've fallen short. The average renter makes far less than what they would actually need to. And that report came out again this week, and housing advocates have really sort of held it up as saying this was the case even before the coronavirus. Mm-hmm. And of course, now we've got the coronavirus, which has, strained the economy and put so many people out of work. And, hey, Governor, shouldn't you be coming out with some sort of a plan to help these people, particularly as we are going to see that federal unemployment benefit go away at the end of this month, which has helped out so many folks. The governor did come out with a plan this week. It's about $24 million, but it's only going to help about 10,000 people around the state. Mm-hmm. We have seen 300,000 people file for unemployment in just the past, continuing claims and new claims in just the past week. I don't think that the unemployment has been below, 10,000 since about January, or it was close to that stage. And of course, since the pandemic has begun, more and more people in the shutdowns, more and more people have filed every week. And so they've said that amount is just not enough. We actually need closer to about $250 million to be able to help all of the people that need this.
And that's for how many months of assistance from that money?
It would be about 3 months. The payments would go directly to your landlord, and it would be either all or a portion of the rent. The way that people can apply is by calling 211 or by going to LouisianaRentHelp.com. You cannot be living with a relative and qualify for this. You cannot also be receiving any other government assistance and qualify for this. It really is geared towards those people who have been employed but lost their job due to coronavirus and are really struggling and, using credit cards and trying to pull together various ways to pay their rent over the past couple of months.
All right, Jessica, thanks a lot. Going to go back over to Mike, and we've had some consent decrees, NOPD and also the parish prison. What are those consent decrees looking like now?
Well, first of all, understand these are costly propositions for the city. The NOPD consent decree alone, more than $8 million a year for all the monitors, all the reports, and back and forth to federal court on a quarterly basis. But this really becomes the tale of two consent decrees, because the police consent decree was thought to be further along than the jail consent decree over the sheriff's office. And instead, in the last month, we've seen the NOPD consent decree take a step backwards with a scathing report by the monitors that the task forces in the districts, which are the proactive crime-fighting forces that target hotspots, had just a laundry list of problems, everything from improper stops, searches, seizures, lack of supervision, poor report writing, and the NOPD and the city tried to get a little bit of a sort of preemptive strike by dismantling the task forces ahead of this very critical report. They are still disbanded under internal investigation, but the big hit is that the mayor has made it known loud and clear that she would like to get out from under this financial burden in 2020. It does not look like that's going to happen with so many remedies that are needed with these task forces. Now, the jail, on the other hand, took a step forward. That was a consent decree that was thought to be not as far along as the NOPD, and the development there is that the sheriff, Marlon Gusman, appears to be in position to take over once again to actually run his own jail instead of the compliance director, Darnley Hodge, who was appointed by the federal judge. So it looks like, that was a motion by the Justice Department. So that looks like clear sailing once it is, given the signature by the federal judge.
How soon could that happen?
As soon as they can assemble. I haven't checked the date on that court hearing, but that's Lance Afric. He runs, a very efficient court. I look for that to happen within a month. That would be the end of this compliance director, Darnley Hodge. Been running that jail for 5 years. Gusman will finally take the reins. Now, just to be clear, that does not mean the end of the jail consent decree. That remains in place as they continue to shore up, once again, everything from, violence in the jail to health care, especially one big issue and sticking point is the mental health care, which the city has now said they cannot afford this phase 3 new building, a mental health care wing of the jail. And that looks to be an issue that is not going to be resolved quickly.
Okay. All righty, Mike. Thanks a lot. I'm going to go back over to Dave right now. Hard Rock Hotel. What is the status of that demolition of the hotel and also the recovery of the victims' remains?
Well, on the good news side is the fact that they were able to take down those 3 buildings surrounding the hotel. Those are gone that they had to get down before they could do this. They were able to remove those pieces of those yellow cranes that were still there. Those are gone. That's the good news. They had hoped that this week they'd be able to start pulling the remains out of the building, but it's not going quite as quickly, it appears, as everyone had hoped. But they are in the process now of going floor by floor from the top down, and they're removing rubble so that they can, when they get low enough, start to get the remains of those 2 workers out of that building. But initially, the mayor said maybe by today that would happen. The fire chief, though, this week, midweek, gave us an update, and he didn't seem as optimistic that that would happen this week. We haven't heard anything official since the middle of this week, but we do know that they have not yet told us any updates in terms of having removed the remains. So they're working on it, and they've been making progress, but they're not there yet.
What are the the difficulties, and like you said, they're making progress, but they're not quite meeting the timeline that they had hoped for. What are they experiencing?
Well, they haven't given us a lot of details, but what they told us, what they were afraid of, is that as they started removing rubble, if things started shifting, as they started seeing the rubble moving around, if it became too unstable, then they'd have to use slower methods to remove that rubble. They hope to be able to take large pieces of the rubble off at a time from each floor and work their way down. But if they start seeing things shift, if it looks like it's getting unstable, then they have to do smaller pieces at a time. Again, we haven't really heard anything from the NOFD since earlier this week, but I know they would have told us if they had gotten that point. And you can, if you just go to the site and look, you don't see a whole lot less rubble at the top of the structure now than you did when they started this process this week. So we're thinking now maybe next week they'll give us an update on how close they are to getting those two bodies out. Remember, they got the one out almost immediately, but the second and third bodies. And now we're talking, this was back in October when this happened, October 12th. So time continues to tick very loudly.
And so how long ultimately? Are they still hopeful for the same timeline to get the whole thing down? What, the end of the year, is it?
Well, they were hoping within a year to get the whole thing
within
down.
A year?
So,
okay.
Yeah, so it's going to be a while more, but I think that getting the remains out of the two workers will be an important benchmark, both on the timeline and emotionally.
Right. All right, Dave, thanks a lot. All right, guys, we're going to go a round table now, because there's other news that's happening, too, that we just haven't been able to touch on tonight. E, start with you.
Well, next week we'll be hearing a lot about qualifying in the district attorney's race in Orleans Parish. Still don't know for sure if the incumbent, Leon Canizero, is going to run or not, but this week candidates have been coming and going, so we'll be hearing a lot about it. But this time next week, we should know who's going to be in the races in November.
That's going to be an interesting race.
Will be.
Jessica.
So we've got the great face mask debate that's been going on for a while now between Governor John Bel Edwards and AG Jeff Landry. Landry recently issued an opinion that basically called the governor's mandate unenforceable. And of course, as we also know, Jeff Landry recently tested positive for coronavirus. That could be an incentive for someone to file a lawsuit challenging the mandate. So we'll keep our eyes peeled to see if that happens.
Okie doke. Thanks a lot, Jessica. Mike, over to you.
Another COVID-related story that everyone's watching, especially parents of kids in schools. The window is closing on schools, both public and private, to make decisions on just how schools are going to reopen. Will it be a remote? Will it be in class? Will it be some kind of hybrid? Everyone's watching the numbers. They're not going in the right direction. So these plans for, things to be more close to normal within class, school is diminishing by the day, and then you have the universities, and they're scrambling to do everything from how to test students, how to keep faculty safe, and looking at putting students in hotels instead of dorm rooms. So there's just so much up in the air.
So much unknown. Thanks, Mike. Okay, Dave, wrap it up with you.
All right, how about a bright note? Starting on Monday, the crew of Red Beans, partnering with the city and some other organizations, will be going around New Orleans and covering your nose in public. You may get a raffle ticket. They're going to hand out 2,000 raffle tickets to people who are wearing masks, and then in early August, they're going to draw one winner to win $10,000 for wearing a mask.
That's incentive to wear a mask, aside from staying healthy. All right, thanks, guys, for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. See you next week for Informed Sources.